how can I in this moment be a glimpse of that safe presence for someone else? And we derive meaning out of that. There's purpose in that. And the more secure I am, the more that's not coming from codependency or desire to please or desire to get something. It's genuinely coming from, I'm secure right here. I can be this safe place for someone else. And that feels really good.
Hey friends, and welcome back for the second half of our Show Up season of the Mary Moran Show, a season all about how we never asked you to be perfect. We just asked you to show up. And today I get to sit down with one of my all-time favorite people on the planet, best-selling author and therapist, Dr. Alison Cook, to talk all about how to keep showing up when it seems like you don't really have an invitation to the table, when that voice in your head tells you that you don't belong, as we dig into her brand new book, The Secure Soul, Finding Inner Strength and Connection When Trust Doesn't Come Easy. Alison, welcome back to the Mary Moran Show for, I believe, the third time.
Thanks, Mary. I was so excited to talk with you today. I love talking with you. It's always a treasure.
Same. I think the best place to kind of kick off this episode is I actually had the huge honor of writing an endorsement for this new book. And so we're just going to start right there. I think it's going to really set the tone for what people can really expect for how deep we're going to go in this episode. I say it is only the rarest of books, the rarest of authors with the rarest of gifts for both words and wisdom that make me want to burst into tears from the very first page. The very first page. This is one of those books. I was hooked from the very first sentence and found myself going back and forth between wanting to devour this book in one sitting and wanting to savor every syllable as slowly as I could to make sure it never ended. Here's the deal. When Dr. Alison Cook says anything, I pay attention. That applies to this episode too, all you people listening at home. But this book, it is her most profound piece of work yet. I don't know how else to say it. This book is healing something in me that I thought would be forever broken. It's going to change so many lives. What a gift she has given us. Don't walk, run to get this beautiful, exceptional book in your hands. So I don't know, maybe we should just call the episode right there. What do you think?
I was so touched by your words.
We have so much to talk about, but basically, if that's all people hear, then they should just go buy the book based on that right then. Like I'm telling you right now, get this book in your hands. I think it's really an accurate description what I said about the wisdom that you bring to the table and just like how much you pack into every sentence. I think that's going to be evidenced here because if you can believe it, I had 5 pages of questions for you after only 2 chapters. So we're going to barely scratch the surface in terms of how long this book actually is. And already we're going to have a full episode just there. So basically, everybody, what I'm saying is go place your pre-order right now. Go do it. Okay, so let's get into, I told you I have a ton of questions for you and I'm ready for it. One of the things you talk about fairly early in those first 2 chapters is being at a women's conference and feeling like you don't belong. And that scene in your life actually brought up another scene for you being a freshman in college. So I want you to start just by setting a scene for us. You're at a women's conference feeling like you don't fit in. You sit down in a seat that somebody comes and tells you that's only for VIP people. Oh, what? And then it brings up this experience from freshman year. Go. Tell us all the things.
Yeah, it kind of brought up that feeling of I don't belong here. And it reminded me of when I grew up, and I know you and I share some of this in common. I grew up in a little town in Wyoming, and I went off back east to New Hampshire to college. And they have what are called these freshman trips. And so everybody goes, it's a small school, Dartmouth, and it's sort of a tradition. Everybody, they send you off into the White Mountains. And, I showed up and I was already immediately out of place because this is before the internet. So I showed up with my sky high ratted out perm that we were doing in the West. Nobody in New England was doing, everybody had the straight hair, pearl earrings, sort of very Connecticut prep school kind of culture. And I just was like, wow, I do not belong here. I literally ran away. I don't think I tell that story in the book, but I literally ran away that first night. And called my sister who lived nearby, and she was older than me and I left home before I had, and she came and picked me up, and I was never going to go back. I did end up going back. But it was just that feeling of I don't belong here. I'm a misfit. Um, and fast forward to that moment as a woman now, in my current life. It wasn't that long ago, a few years ago. I'm at a huge mega church in the South, and just from the minute I show up, it's that same feeling of I'm wearing the wrong clothes. I don't have the right thing. Everybody else seems to fit in effortlessly and I don't belong here. And it's just an awful
Mm.
feeling.
Yeah, and the scene in the freshman year of college, you are just existing basically, and you accidentally step on some guy's sleeping bag, and he's just like snaps at you, and it's just so interesting
Yeah.
how, to that guy, he if you probably told him about it, he wouldn't even remember it, but it becomes one of these like core kind of memories. We're gonna have different language for that later on in this episode, but sort of like we begin to see the world through that filter, and the other person has no idea.
Exactly. It's so true. It's so true. I'm certain that guy does not remember that, nor does he think it.
Yeah.
I actually remember, like, it was so scarring to me because he did. He was like, "Get off my sleeping bag," and I remember, like, senior year, kind of hear, everyone was saying, "Oh, he's a really nice guy," and I was like, oh, "That guy's not a nice guy," and then realizing, okay, this was so much of a bigger deal in my world than it
Right.
was in anybody else's.
Right. And so you kind of have your own version of that guy at the women's conference when
Yeah.
everybody's kind of settling in for worship, and you go to take some seats in the back, out of thinking out you're going to be out of the way of people, and somebody comes and taps you and says, "Not there. That's for very
Yeah.
important people," which is
Yeah.
just such a metaphor for I think what it feels like to walk into these conferences and these worlds where we're going to be around people who are doing the same dream that we are. We're going to talk a lot about that later. This idea of like the peer groups that can start to make us feel like we don't belong. This whole season of the podcast is about showing up and going after the dream, doing the thing you're being called to. And we're examining all the different things that keep us stuck. And I think it's a big reality that some of these tables can feel like a circle, not a horseshoe. They're closed off. We're complete in the people who are already sitting at this table. We don't need more people. And
Mhm.
they can really just give the, implication, whether intentional or not, that the invitation has not been extended. You're not welcome
Mhm.
in most rooms. You're not
Mhm.
invited to most tables. So I'm going to read a passage from the book. You say, "Beneath every instance of rejection, every unanswered message, every dismissive glance, every invitation withheld or crowded room where everyone seems to belong but you, there's a deeper story, a story your body remembers, a story your heart still holds, a story with ancient roots, because these moments aren't just about now. They touch on old attachment wounds. They're about what's
Mhm.
being reactivated in your nervous system, old imprints of disconnection from your earliest years still tender beneath the surface. These wounds don't only live in the past, they live in your body, shaping what you expect and how you interpret what's happening in the present. In vulnerable moments, they whisper an old message: you don't belong here. And you say in the book, what's striking is that this feeling of not being chosen, this feeling of not belonging, isn't just emotional, it's actually physical. And
Mhm.
neuroscience backs that up for us. Will you just tell us more about our brains interpreting this as a physical threat?
Yeah, there were some studies done. I had a friend who worked on some of the early studies that were done where they tracked the brain, and it's called social rejection, and they kind of tracked where the brain gets lit up when there's an experience of social rejection. If there's a group of people playing and somebody's left out, or people are like, I think it was they were throwing a ball back and forth and they would never throw the ball to one person, and they would track what happens in the brain. And
Huh.
one of the findings was, and this has evolved a lot over time, but one of the early findings was that the same region of the brain lights up with social rejection as lights up with physical pain. It's as if
Hmm.
you get punched. It's the
Wow.
same. Social rejection is a very similar part of the brain. There's a real pain that occurs. It's very real. And I think most of us that have experienced it know that, but we feel like we tend to shame ourselves. We tend to we do one of two things. We tend to shame ourselves, something's wrong with me, that I'm don't belong, or we vilify the other person when in fact it's like to your point about the guy in college, like, maybe it wasn't a kind moment, but even at that church in the South, I kind of knew consciously, I was like, there's some really kind women here, and it's a huge gathering. People get busy. Sometimes people are like, I can't just. You want to either the default is to shame yourself or vilify the other. Now, sometimes the other person is being cruel. Um, But in general, I find it more helpful to look at what the point of what is this stirring up inside of me? What is this
Yeah.
stirring up inside of me? What are the deeper roots of this? Because those rejection aches, that ache of not belonging, that ache of feeling out of it, out of the circle, goes way back for most of us. We have deep wounds there, and that's the more helpful place to start, is within our own selves.
You know what's really fascinating that was just coming up for me just then is the dynamic. I'm picturing like billiard balls bouncing off of one another maybe. But the
Yeah.
dynamic that happens when like our wounds bump up against somebody else's wounds and like the filter we have for how we see the world versus how they see the world. Like I'm not defending this guy at all. He could have just been a total like Dartmouth frat boy jerk. I have no idea. But like, what if his wound says people don't see me or like I don't matter? People
Mhm.
walk all over me or people don't appreciate
Mhm.
me, maybe. And so, like, for him in that moment, it's like the sleeping bag being stepped on was like, oh, here's just more evidence of me being
Mhm.
stepped on. And it's like his filter and your filter, then, what we all tend to have to do, the tendency to do is like run back to our corners. And that becomes the kind of narrative we're spinning in our heads. I
Mhm.
would love for you to just talk for a second in that moment back to the conference
Mhm.
when somebody's tapping you on the shoulder and literally saying like, "Oh, you've crossed the velvet rope. This
Mhm.
is the VIP section. You clearly and instantly we know you don't belong here." Somehow they know that, right?
Mhm.
Just physically, like you talk about this in the book a bit, but like physically, how did you start to feel in your outfit and your clothes and your body, feeling, like too tall or too short or any of those sorts of things?
Yeah.
Like, what did that feel like?
Yeah, it's something I kind of realized as I was writing some of these and kind of tapping into those old memories, that for me it always ends up feeling like, I think I say I felt like a giraffe on stilts. And
Yeah.
I'd worked really hard to like pick out an outfit, because I knew I was going to be, and it's kind of that teenage version of us, and suddenly I just felt awkward. I had like little heels on, and I felt like I was sort of like gangly and just so conspicuous,
Mhm.
just so conspicuous. Like everything about me was wrong, and I just remember that feeling of walk kind of trying to sneak up to the front row, because he said, "Oh, you can sit over there." And the only seats that were open in the whole auditorium in that section were in the very front row. So, I'm having to
Yeah.
walk, it's like a walk of shame, like kind of,
Right.
walk in front of everybody by myself. I've just been kicked out. And honestly, I don't know that anybody else even noticed me. You know what I mean? It's that feeling of conspicuousness of just as I kind of just tried to slink into the front row without being seen, and just feeling so visible in the wrong way.
Right, totally. And like, I think that's just so ironic that you were trying to avoid all of that by sitting in those original seats to begin with. You're trying to be
Right?
inconspicuous.
I know.
And like what you described there, you talk about like using your big purse, feeling like a shield, and that just sort of instant, very physical, visceral, like suddenly nothing fits right, nothing feels comfortable. Between that going on in our bodies
Mhm.
and the neuroscience going on in our minds of feeling like we're under a physical threat,
Mhm.
you have this really great word that you use in the book that I think kind of describes moments like that we have all experienced. And this is this word rupture. You
Mhm.
say in psychology, we tend to think of a rupture as a disruption in the emotional bond between two people, a breakdown in connection that leaves one person feeling unseen, unsafe, or misunderstood. But the ruptures I worry about most aren't the ones that happen between two people. They're the ones that take root inside you, in the places in your soul that absorb what happens outside you. When those tender places go unattended, they begin to form an inner tear. I call this a soul rupture. And you go on to say, like, when you see someone operating out of hurting people, hurt people, or insecurity, or feeling like they don't belong, one of the first questions you ask is what happened that never got tended.
Mhm.
And all of this conversation thus far reminds me of that quote. We see things not as they are, but as we are
Yeah.
on the one hand. And then also, really quick, just to kind of finish setting up this question, is I've also recently discovered something called rejection sensitivity or rejection
Yeah.
sensitive dysphoria,
Yeah.
that I think I might have. Allison, we don't
Yeah.
have to diagnose me in this
Yeah.
episode. I'm kidding
Yeah.
when we can, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but like just to kind of like for everybody who's maybe hearing this phrase for the first time, it's this very extreme emotional response to perceived criticism, disapproval, or failure. It causes
Yeah.
intense emotional and physical pain that feels hard to contend with or control, feeling crushed, furious, or deeply ashamed over minor or even imagined
Mm.
slights. And so,
Mm.
woof,
Mm.
that's a lot of information there. But will you just kind of unpack in light of things like we see things not as they are, but as we are, how these soul ruptures show up in the world?
Yeah. If I think about that moment, for me, it showed up kind of in that disembodied. I kind of like, again, tried to stay disappeared so that I was kind of like hiding behind my giant bag, pressing my back against when I finally got out of the front row seat, and I was just kind of standing against the wall and being aware that, so it was a conference, people were singing, and being aware that I was trying to go through the motions, but a part of me was just not there. It was I was not. I had left the building. Now, you know, I have enough insight about what's happening inside of us. I think for a lot of people, it's that feeling of I'm going through the motions. I'm kind of smiling and doing the thing, but inside I just want to leave, or kind of being aware I'm trying too hard, I'm talking too much. These things that we do that later we just beat ourselves up over. And there is something going on outside of us. I don't want to minimize that, but in those moments, it's what's happening inside of us that we actually can change, and that we can actually, and we don't often, in those moments we're like, well, what do I do? Like, I can't leave. I'm here. I'm stuck. I'm trapped. But
Mm,
what I did in that moment is I gave myself permission to walk up to a dark corner way up of the auditorium where no one could see me.
yeah.
If I'm at a party and that happens and I start to feel, so again, not to be reactive, like, but more like I'm gonna go into the bathroom for a second. I'm going to look in the mirror. I'm going to put my hand on my heart. I'm going to take a breath, because it's something that's happening inside of me right now. And again, I'm not saying the people outside aren't being mean, or aren't leaving me out, or aren't making me uncomfortable. They may well be, but I still have choice. I have agency. They do not get to have this power over me. And
Yeah.
so for me, finding a place to be by myself, with myself, honoring something is happening here, is how that stops, is how I honor that rupture. Something has torn inside of me. I'm disconnected from myself. And the first place that I have agency is with that inner tear. Something doesn't feel right here. I'm not okay. Let me give myself a moment to honor that before I even make some assessment of what's happening out here, before I fight or flee. Let me pause and be with myself in this moment, and not allow this to become a deeper gash. Let it
Mm,
notice, oh, there's a sting here. What is that sting? Let me pay attention to it. Because I think so many of us have a lifetime of
yeah.
not tending to the
Yeah.
small sting, and those become deep gashes inside, deep ruptures inside, where
Yeah.
we can't find our way back to ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's so good. One of the things that you wrote in the book, and it made me really pause, and I want us to kind of camp here for just a second. I hinted at this a second ago. You say, okay, I'm disconnected. I'm feeling disconnected. Ask yourself, when do I feel it most? When do I feel untethered, alone, distant, unseen, unknown, or simply overlooked? It might be in your marriage, in friendships, with your children, at work, or in your neighborhood. And I want everybody listening to kind of just pause and sit with that as well. You can go ahead and even hit pause on the episode if you want. Ask yourself that question. When do you most feel that disconnect? When do you most feel that overlooked? And, come back to us when you have your answer. For me, I know my answer. I'm going to give mine first. I would love to hear yours as well, Allison. But what this brought up for me, and I just really even sat with it when I was prepping for the show, just like, man, why is that? For me, I tend to feel it the most when I am in a group of peers who are doing the same big things that I am.
Mm.
I felt it in law school. I felt it in the photography world among other speakers and educators, course creators. I feel it a lot of times. It's less so with authors, I think, just because of how authors are wired. We are these kind of quirky, awkward turtles who are introverts who love to hang out, but in very small doses or whatever. But I think authors are just more my people. So I feel it less, but I do still absolutely feel it. And you said something that really ties back to this that I just want to read because it really puts words to something I felt. You said, for a long time, I told myself I didn't need it, meaning other people or connections, that the connections I saw around me weren't what they seemed, shiny on the surface, but shallow, not necessarily more secure than my own company. And as an introvert, I was like, amen. Sometimes that was true, but it was never the whole story. At other times, I'd tell myself that it was something wrong with me, that it was my fault. I felt alone, even when surrounded by other people, that I was too much, not enough, or somehow wired incorrectly. And that story wasn't any kinder. I think part of my not feeling comfortable around peers is that the automatic script and the automatic filter I see is like, this is all fake. You're all just rubbing elbows. It's
Mm.
all pretend. You're all out for yourselves. You're just going to sort of like take what you can to advance your career, but it's not going to be like a real true friendship. It's not, just let me hang out with me and my dog and my husband. And that feels safe. So I just really resonated with the way you
Mm.
were sort of describing the shiny, shallow aspect of other relationships that wouldn't be as secure as my own company. So anyway, that's
Mm.
my answer. I'm curious if you have an answer you want to talk about, but I will say for me, a lot of this is just this idea of let me reject them before they reject me.
Mhm.
So riff on any and all of that comes to mind.
I mean, honestly, the place for me that is the hardest, I don't know if this counts, but right now that there's almost never an instance of feeling healthy or positive is social media.
Yes.
It's it and
Yeah.
it may well be because I have a book coming out right now. So it's
Mm.
particularly heightened. I mean, I don't think it's ever great, but I just put that together when you said that. For me, it's just a place of almost an instant, I'm not as good as, I don't belong here. I'm not doing it that way. So but I think it's a really, because I think it does give us clues, because I also think it's a helpful question to think about, where are the places where we don't feel that way,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And
Yeah.
because you can
With my dog.
forget yourself. Yeah, yeah,
And my husband and my marriage and my home and my
yeah,
little
yeah,
bubble.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, a room full of really, kind of to your point, quirky, eccentric academics, love
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Love
Oh,
it.
yeah. Totally.
Just no, no, you know what I mean? So there are different kinds of rooms, or, my friend and I have this, we talk about the island of misfit toys
Yeah.
from Rudolph. It's like another
Yes.
place where I sense a whole lot of misfits together,
That's right.
versus, and you can kind of feel it,
Mhm.
versus a room where it feels like everybody is kind of, and I think that's what social
Yeah.
media represents. It's like, because the algorithm favors all the people who are kind of doing the same thing. And it's like, what's
Yeah.
wrong with me that I'm not doing that?
Yes,
Right?
100%. I love that you just
Yeah.
brought that up because
Yeah.
so today I'm recording with you and I'm recording with Michael and Smith, whose episode will come out a week or two after yours. And we're talking about something totally different with her, which is like decorating and house
Hmm.
hushing. But one of the questions I have for her is like this feeling of all of the quirks and the things that give a home character and the things that make a home different. When we look online and that's not what's being celebrated or
Yes.
rewarded, we think that we're doing it wrong or our house is not worthy or it's broken or whatever. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing
Yes.
for
Yeah.
people.
Yes.
So I love that. And so we're even sitting here talking about it. I love talking to you so much because there's just layers, and we get the
Hmm.
opportunity to go deeper. And something that came up for me, even as I was describing that to you, is there's definitely a big part of that. I think it branches into two parts. One is that I'm an Enneagram 4. So we need to feel like special unicorns where we're not just the best, we're the only. And so to be in a room of like, oh, here are a bunch of people who are also doing what you're doing makes us feel like, what do you mean? What do you mean? We don't, share
Hmm.
rainbow glitter everywhere we go or whatever. Because we're such unicorns. The other side of that, I think, is being a very empathetic person, being an introvert, being, someone who wants to listen more than I talk.
Yeah.
Contrary to, hosting a podcast, probably. But I think where there's overlap with my answer and your answer with social media is just this idea of like, how much attention do you need? How much noise do you need to make? Like it all
Yeah.
feels very
Yeah.
performative and very like,
Yeah.
the I call it the lake mead fish in slow growth, flopping all over each other for a share of the crumbs, right? It just seems like
Hmm.
this productive, productive, productive,
Mhm.
performative, performative.
Mhm.
And I would just rather go quiet than engage in conversations like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. Well, now that we've sorted me out, you mentioned earlier that you called it shame and like villainizing, but in the book you call it shame and blame. You say a soul rupture is a wound within your soul, whether big or small, that can be repaired through loving presence, tenderness, and honesty. But when you don't know how to tend to that inner wound, it doesn't stay small or isolated. What began as a moment of heartbreak or rejection, a wound that could have been a minor scratch or bruise, because becomes something much more entrenched. Instead of healing, you reach for whatever gives you even a moment of relief. For most of us, that means doing what humans have done since the beginning of time. You turn to shame or blame. You mentioned them before, but can you just even like tell us some scripts that, like we talk about like the most common Mad Lib
Mhm.
scripts of fear? How do you see the scripts of shame and blame show up in people's minds?
Yeah, shame is something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. This is my fault. What's wrong with me? And blame is there. I mean, honestly, it's kind of that they're shallow. It's a judgment call that
Yeah.
may or may not be true. There's something wrong with them. They're mean. They're something that again, there's a difference between naming, having looked at the data and said, "Oh, this is a kind of person whose character I don't play with." I'm not here for this. Go in peace. I'm going to set boundaries with this person, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about that kind of visceral, like, I hate these people. I don't like these people. These people are bad. Kind of the opposite of
Mm,
shame. And we
yeah.
tend to one or the other. I think a lot of highly sensitive women, a lot of deeply feeling empaths, we definitely go more toward the shame, but
Mm,
there can be, even in my own life, I see, these quiet resentments form,
hmm.
that
Yeah.
I have to really watch out for and be like, that's also not I don't have to, and that is a secure soul can honor this isn't a good fit for me. This doesn't feel good to me. And the more I've given myself the strength to remove myself, I see you talk about this a lot, Mary, to remove myself from places that don't receive me, the
Yes.
more that resentment goes away.
Yeah.
That resentment is
Right.
when I'm trying to get in somewhere that doesn't really want me, that inner tension forms. So again, I'm not trying to say this as a we should love everybody. I'm saying this
Yeah.
as a we can very clearly be like, this isn't a place where my best self comes forth.
Mhm.
Therefore, I'm going to leave that aside. I'm going to
Yeah.
step away from that. It gives us that agency of I'm choosing here. I'm making a choice. At that conference, I ended up leaving quietly, but I ended up kind of leaving. And in that decision, I got my poise back. I got my dignity back, and I never said anything to anybody. And it kind of was oh, this just isn't a great fit.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize this about, that this would create so much dissonance inside.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Like back in the auditorium, even before the decision to leave, you say, I recognize the ache. So, you can kind
Hmm.
of catch it in real time. You could
Hmm.
catch the spiral as it's happening. And I decide to reconnect, not to the group, but to myself. In that moment, which version of you showed up? Like, who was the you that you were
Hmm.
reconnecting to?
Yeah, there's a lot of different word language we could give for it. True self, your inner wisdom.
Hmm.
Sort of a theological term would be the image of God. The
Hmm.
you before things kind of went sideways. That as they do in all of our lives. But that's where we're trying to tap into that best version of ourselves, that inner self. And, if you think of the neuroscience, I always think it's amazing that humans are designed such that we can observe ourselves.
Yeah.
I read
Right.
once, I always feel bad when I leave my sweet pups when I have to travel. And I learned that dogs, they do feel sad, but they're not aware that they feel sad. That
Oh.
awareness
Hmm.
is a big difference. And if you think about it, as humans, we feel something and then we're aware that we feel it.
Wow.
And that awareness is sort of that inner eye, that inner observer, that self that can say, oh, that's the repair of the rupture. It's oh my gosh, I'm hurting here. I don't enjoy feeling that hurt, but I can differentiate from that hurt enough to observe it. So that's, again, there's a lot of different name. You can kind of have a more scientific name for it, or a theological name for it, but it's sort of that inner wisdom, your true self that sees what's happening and doesn't erase what's happening, but has perspective on what's happening.
Love that. And as you kind of tapped into that, observing self,
Yeah.
you were able to encounter a different version of yourself that
Yeah.
was younger you. And you say, and it's here in the quiet that I recognize her, a young teenage version of myself who has simply had enough. Down there, I felt invisible, fragmented. But here, away from the noise, I can finally see a fuller picture of myself. This younger version of me who has always felt so awkward, so out of her element, so on the outside looking in. She's not actually overly sensitive. She's not stupid or fragile or any of the dismissive labels I've silently assigned her to keep her at arm's length all these years. In fact, she's quite the opposite. She's more like a wild colt. Oh, do I love that description? Untamed but passionate and fiery, longing for something real and ready to break free. She may not be up for the polished performance happening down below, but she is fully alive and aching for me to finally pay attention to her. I have like literally head to toe chills happening right now reading that
Mm.
excerpt, which is what I felt reading it as well. They're just like on repeat up and down my spine, because I think it just puts such words to, especially if there's something about that language of the colt, like unsure on your legs, but
Mhm.
also ready to
Yeah.
run and go places. And
Yeah.
we're fiery and we're not trying to be tamed or put in the corral with all,
Yeah.
everybody else, who's being sort of images of like sheep or cattle or whatever. And so I just super love that description. And you talk about in the book, and I want you to kind of walk us through how the heck we do this. A big part of diffusing those downward spiral bombs, those I don't belong bombs before they totally go off, is presence with different versions of ourselves, with different parts of ourselves that want to be seen. You've been helping people do this for years, but if somebody's hearing about this for the first time, they're like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Like, who
Yeah.
shows up? How do you know who shows up? Who do you call forward?
Yeah.
This feels weird. So just walk us through, like, how the heck do you even know which part of you to talk to, or to even be aware which part has shown up?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. There's sort of but I guess if I take the scientific approach, there's this idea that every prior version of ourselves still lives within us, and we all know this feeling. We have that, and a lot of it's through memory.
Yeah.
We remember. It's not that I just remember what it felt like, to be 10 years old walking into the classroom for the first time, but that memory is still alive inside of me. And memory, as we know, can be great power for just, the nostalgia and the joy. A memory can conjure up joy. I was so affected by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about how the memory of the love of his wife essentially got him through
Hmm.
the most atrocious thing any human can go through, right? That power of memory is very powerful. But when there's been pain,
Mhm.
those memories also still live in us. And so there's different ways you can kind of, as a therapist, as a psychologist who studies this, there's lots of different ways people try to get at these painful memories and the power they still have over us. And the most helpful tool I've found, it's rooted in the internal family systems model of therapy, which was depicted brilliantly in the Pixar movie Inside Out. But it's this idea that these younger versions of you still live inside of you. So it's almost not just a memory. It's that, and for me, and for many people that I work with, that ability to almost imagine. So I can almost imagine, for me, that a lot of the book goes back to 13, 14-year-old me, and I can imagine her and I can feel her presence. And what I'm doing when I'm doing that is I'm sort of differentiating the memory of that pain from the current pain,
Mhm.
because so much the rejection that lands in my current life has a long tail all the way back to every place inside of me that has felt a similar emotion. It's emotional memory, and it's very real.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
this is just a tool. It's one tool that I found so helpful, and so many people have found so helpful, that when that happens, right when I'm like, I'm just at a conference. I don't really like it. Why is this such a big deal?
Right.
It's tapping on that memory that goes so far back to every moment I felt on the outside looking in, like I don't belong, like I'm not good enough. And so in that moment, I kind of, because I've done this work, I could connect with, for me, it started in about that really deep feeling of it, like 6th grade, 7th grade. For a lot of people, a lot of girls, that's the age when we just start, people are starting to mature, you go through adolescence, but that early adolescent of just like something isn't, and that feeling is just so palpable. And then I can connect to that younger version of me, which allows me to have compassion, because I can
Yeah.
have compassion for her in a way that's hard for me to have compassion for my adult self.
Yeah. The image when you were describing like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade was like it's like Lord of the Flies. It's like Machiavelli meets middle school.
It's
You
it's
know?
just a rough time for many,
It's rough.
many people, and that's the irony, It's like
Yeah.
I've heard I understand the rejection sensitivity. I've read a lot about that, and I know it's real, and also on some level, it's just not pleasant for anyone,
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
very real. It's harder for some than others, for sure. But we're not abnormal, because those just you talk to somebody about middle school hurts and it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, and some people are like, I
Right.
don't want to go back there, but I have found a lot of healing in reconnecting to those younger versions of myself, extending her the compassion she didn't get
Mhm.
back then, right? This is
Yeah.
unwitnessed pain, and unwitnessed pain lives more forcefully in our current selves. When we can go back and give those younger versions of ourselves the care they needed back then, it takes away some of that power so that the current pain becomes just that was a bummer, but I'm not tapping into every single pain I've ever felt.
Right. I think what's really powerful about the way you describe it in the book and what you're talking about here is that you're not even just remembering the scene. You're actually almost able to kind of project that version of you sitting beside you.
Yeah.
And in previous episodes, we've talked about this concept of reparenting or,
Yeah.
just, yeah, like witnessing the pain. And based on our conversations and underestimated, there's a scene where I talk about picking up the littlest version of me. She's like crying and
Yes.
crying and crying alone on the floor, and like her tears fill the laugh lines on my 40-year-old face, basically, like as I kind of hold her
Mm.
close and I feel her little nightgown. And so to even be able to bring forth these previous versions of us and comfort them and console them, there's a line where you talk about kissing the hair of of your teenage self, and just being sitting beside her and listening, not trying to tell her what to think or believe or feel. I think just I wanna camp here for one more second. Like, if somebody's like, "Okay, that sounds actually like that could be really powerful," but, like, how the heck do you even know which version of you to call forward? How do you know if they're in the room? How do they make themselves known? Does this just like a memory flash through your head? Is it like an instant answer? Or do you if the answer doesn't come instantly, what are some questions you can ask to get that
Mhm.
version of you to show up? Like, how the heck do you do this in a very practical
Yeah.
way?
Yeah, my first book really walks people through that step-by-step process, Boundaries for Your Soul. But what I would say is we almost always have one of the questions I'll tell people to ask when you're feeling that pain of disconnection or the pain of not belonging or of rejection, and you feel the big emotion. When you get that moment to yourself, even if you're like in the bathroom stall for a second, you put your hand on your heart, it's like, how old does this feel? How old do
Mhm.
I feel?
Wow.
And sometimes like 5 years old, I feel like, and usually it's shaming, you're just like, I feel like I'm like being a baby, or,
Right.
but take that at face value, not in a shaming way. I feel like a baby, I feel like a little baby that just wants to have a tantrum. I feel like
Yeah.
that 12-year-old girl in the middle school bus, instead of it being the answer is often there in a shaming way because
Hmm.
we're mad at ourselves that we're having this childish reaction when
Yeah.
in fact, a young memory, a young place inside of us that never got the care that it needed is flaring up. And so to kind of say, how I feel, it's like how I felt when I was 12 years old. The other thing I'll say is we tend to have these core memories that we don't often. You write about this so well, Mary. Most people will be like, what's a core memory that kind of just lingers with you? And maybe you don't even know why. Maybe it seems insignificant. You've kind of dismissed it, but it's there. There's usually a cue because when something happens to us as a kid, the brain takes a snapshot and those memories are lit up more than others. And honestly, the good things, the pleasant things, don't, we remember them, but we remember in more vivid detail the painful things. And so those memories are there for a reason. They're little breadcrumbs. And I want to say this for the listener, if those memories feel too overwhelming, because this also pertains to trauma, and don't go get help, go to a therapist to unpack those memories, because there may be really, really deep, painful stuff there. But a lot of times we have these, I just, I'll ask a client, what does that remind you of? I just remember when my dog, our family dog passed away. My parents just kind of dismissed it. And that it's
Mm,
just so dumb, but that memory's no, that's not dumb.
yeah.
Something happened there. You needed something there that didn't get seen. Or I have this memory of being on a park bench, and my parents were fighting, and my dad didn't pick me up after school.
Mm.
Something happened there. So there's two ways into it. One is in the moment, ask yourself, how old does this feel? And the other is those memories that just kind of linger with us and we don't know why.
Gosh, I love that because it reminds me. So, like in the same way in Underestimated, we're talking about using fear to actually flip that on fear to
Yes.
use how predictable
Yes.
it is to show we're on the right track. It's like using shame to actually help us find clues to which version of us needs some attention.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
so good. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, so you talked in the book, you briefly sort of mentioned this idea of bids for attention, which was language that was made popular by John and Julie Gottman talking about marriage. Justin and I talk about, we were actually just talking about this the other day, like bids for attention. Like when he's going to show me yet another video of an incredible baseball play that's never been seen before. And I'm like, okay. But like in that moment, I can either be like, why do you keep showing me these? Or I can
Yeah.
be like, I can lean in with interest and with curiosity. And I have a million of those the other direction.
Yeah.
Like the balance of, of things we show
Yeah.
each other's. I have probably a lot more random things I show him. So we are interested in one another. We lean in when that person is saying, "Hey, I want to share this with you." So taking that same approach when the different parts of us or younger
Yeah.
versions of us are bidding for our attention. And so to kind of build on that as a way of transitioning into the next story I want you to share, there's an even younger version of you who shows up from the very beginning of the book, which starts with the sentence, "A part of me doesn't like God very much." You discover this on the surprising truth on a late night prayer walk in London. So set that scene for us and who showed up.
Yeah, so I'd been in London with my husband, and earlier that day, I was like a little kid in a good way. Like, I hadn't been, I think I'd been to London once, maybe, when I was in like a high school, I don't know, something or other. And it's just like every block in London has some memory of a childhood book. It's wild.
Mm,
It's like there's Harry Potter, there's Noel Streatfeld, the Shoes Girls. I have these books right behind me. Every book
yes.
I ever loved as a kid, the Frances Hodgson Burnett, the Secret Garden,
Hmm.
Paddington, and I was just like a
Yep.
little kid was just like, oh, this is just so cool. I had that like little 8-year-old energy. And my husband late at night, he takes these prayer walks. He's like, come with me. And I went with him, and I had that kind of buzzing little girl energy. And my husband's praying, we walk and pray. And I was like, I don't want to pray. And then as I attuned to that young part of me, it was deeper than that. It was like, I don't like God, kind of like an 8-year-old. I don't like God, and in a prior version of my life, I might have been like, well, this cannot be. We'll just, pray that away, or Bible verse that over. But
Yeah.
I've done this work for a while. So I was like, well, let me get curious about that. And Mary, it was just, and the whole walk ironically became a prayer walk, but in a very different way than, what I
Yeah.
thought it would be. Because through the process of connecting, and it made sense to me. And now as I think back, I'm like, of course, but it was information I didn't fully understand about myself. But this is a young girl who her experience of God was like, be quiet, don't giggle in church, wear these ugly pinafore dresses that are stiff and uncomfortable. It's overly wrought, religious discussions around a table when she wants to like play. And I mean, my adult self could have, well, that's not who God is. But that's the experience. This young girl the memory still lived inside of me. That's what it means to close your eyes and pray. And I couldn't talk myself out of that. It was just like this is that experience still of a young part of me. A lot of me knows that is not how I relate to God, but this young girl. And so it was just a moment because she was there already. That was sort of that childlike wonder was alive. Hadn't been, I'd been kind of buried in work for a long time. So it was like, oh wow, this is what it feels like to have that childlike play. She didn't want me to make her go away, and prayer felt like she's got to go away. So
Yeah.
I what tried to be with her. And a lot of the folks reading this book who are parents have said to me, it's kind of helping me figure out how I need to be with my own kids, my real life
Right.
kids, right?
Oh,
Because
right.
it's like if she was my child, I can imagine if I had an 8-year-old who was like, I don't want to pray is boring. I wouldn't, now that I understand what I understand, be like, well, I would be like, well, tell me more about your understanding. What does that mean to you? I could get curious about it. So I
Yeah.
tried to do that with that part of me.
I love that. And I just want to pause and like really underline that and underscore that for everybody listening. We briefly mentioned this when we were talking about you with teenage you.
Yeah.
You did this again with little you. You say, I don't try to talk them out of how they're feeling. I
Right.
don't try to tell them that it's wrong for them to feel that way or just like, quickly shut them down and give them like updated information. I sit with them in presence. I sit with them in curiosity. And I start to say, well, what would feel like God? What would feel like,
Yes.
fun or what have you? And so I just feel like that's a very crucial element of this process that I want everybody listening at home to take away from this is that when those parts show up, it's not your job to say, "Oh, you have outdated information. Here's how we feel now. Here's who we are now. Like get over it." It's to sit with them in curiosity. You mentioned this part and in my notes I wrote down that it gave me absolute chills. You say as you're talking about wanting to reason with her about who God really is, you say, "But I recognize that reasoning with her is not what she needs. She is responding to my presence, to my being
Mm.
with her. So I continue to attune to her." And then she goes on to tell you, "If you start to pray, I'm afraid you'll leave me." And that just gave me like chills and set up the tears that were about to fall in the next part I'll mention here in a second is just when we're in a situation like the conference and we feel like we're being left behind or we feel like we're being
Mhm.
abandoned or we're not being welcome, that's almost how desperate it feels. It's like, I'm
Mhm.
afraid you're going to leave me. And
Yeah.
my story. So, that like my mom leaving when I was 9 is a big
Yeah.
part of it. And so
Yeah.
I just really like that really stopped me even I meant it from like the first page
Mm.
or first couple of pages that these parts of us feel like even something as pure and as simple as praying to God, anything that makes them feel left out or forgotten or left behind or that they'll lose you. That's just how visceral this feeling is.
Mhm.
And so I go on to just say like the part that made me really the tears broke loose is you say, "I then turn my attention to God for a moment, who is also there with me, with us, though this young one doesn't yet know it." "What do you make of this?" I ask with wide eyes. "Stay with her," God says. "She needs you." Oh, that's that grown
Mhm.
up in the room that we talk about, that you
Mhm.
talk about, that we've talked about in past episodes that I write about and
Mhm.
underestimated you telling me. And I don't know, like, I just wanna pause here a little minute for little Allison, little Mary, and little whoever's listening right now at home, like,
Yeah.
that these younger versions of us just need us to
They
be
need
with them.
us.
Yeah.
We work really hard to find safe people in our real life, and which is important work, but it is so powerful and so amazing when you realize you can become that safe presence for these younger versions of you. You can
Yeah.
be with these young versions of you, and it is powerful. It's beautiful, tender, vulnerable, sweet work. And I love that. I also loved that moment because it's also, if you're raised in a church, it's sort of everything's supposed to go to God, and that God is like, no, you be that. She needs you. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like, because,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes, I think about that with if my daughter was hurting, I wouldn't just say, God, please take care of her. I would be
Right.
like,
I'm
I,
out.
I
Yeah,
need to be
right.
with her. God, help
Right.
me be with her, you
Yeah.
know? And
Mm.
um it's beautiful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, gosh. Okay, well, I know that we have a lot to cover still, running a little short on time, so I'm gonna bounce ahead to secure attachments and what you ultimately argue is the even higher version of that, the better version of that, the secure soul. So, kind of really briefly setting up secure attachments, we've talked about it on different episodes of the show. I'm sure we've talked about it in our episodes, but just this idea of if you grew up in a household where you felt seen, soothed, and safe, then that becomes kind of that filter that we've been talking about all
Mhm.
along. We see things as not as they are, but as we are, where we assume whatever happens, we're going to be safe. Somebody's going to show up for us. The people are reliable in being where they say they're going to be and making sure we're included, that our survival as part of the group will endure. And you talk about how that is important Our
Mhm.
relationships with other people, our family, even our friends, our marriages are
Mhm.
important in having secure attachment, but there's a more enduring version of that that has really been missing from the conversation. So
Mhm.
just break that apart for us.
Yeah, I wanted to make this as universally applicable as possible. My own, faith context is Christian, but I was trying to make it as not pat answery as possible, which is this idea. So often in the book, I use the capital L, love, but this idea, God is love. There is a loving presence that is the source that
Mm,
holds all of us through our imperfect search for human connectedness,
yeah.
and through our imperfect search to try to reconnect with our own selves. We're not doing it alone. And I think
Mm,
that has been so meaningful to me as a sort of more inwardly focused, contemplative um, type of Christian, right? Where it's not so much of the work for me happens internally of reconnecting to love itself, and it's that love that kind of fills in all the gaps,
mm,
that human love never can quite 100% fully do that. I love Yalom. He's sort of the age old existential psychotherapist who says that, to some level, an experience of isolation is universal,
right.
and he defines that, and that's different than loneliness that's circumstantial or grief. He's talking about this idea that truly at some level no other human being can completely inhabit my inner world,
Right.
right?
Right.
No matter how, and when we're searching for that to be our ultimate, it's always going to be disappointing. We can sure find some people that get close, but that and that's what I'm really trying to focus in on that book. It's that inner life. It's me as the recognizing agent, as the
Hmm.
as the self that can notice what's happening, and then it's that return to the source, which is God's love, God,
Mm,
that allows us to find that secure base. And I think of it a lot when you think about attachment. You think about a child needing that secure base from a parent from which to explore, from which to take risks, from which to go out into the world, fall, but always have a place of love to come back to. And a lot of us didn't get that fully, some more than others, but a lot of us didn't get that at all, that secure base. And that ultimately, that can be discouraging. It's like, well, if I didn't get that in my
mm,
parents, then I just don't have it. And I'm like,
right.
no, 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 because those imperfect parents, even the best of them, always were a poor imitation of love itself. They were
Wow.
always trying to imitate that. And we have access to that loving ultimate attachment figure in the divine, in God.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. You say the truth I want us to discover together is this. The deepest kind of secure attachment doesn't originate with parents. It isn't sustained only by family, friends, or partners. As vital as those relationships are, no human bond, no matter how loving, was ever meant to carry the full weight of our need to belong. Secure attachment begins in the heart of God. It flows through imperfect human bonds, shaping our souls in real and embodied ways. And it always calls us back to its source, capital S, source, back to the one who made us live securely held in capital L love, even when the human love falls short. So, attention I want us to sit in and have you sort of unpack for us is that somebody could hear this, and there's a part of me that would like to hear this and take it to this extreme. The part of me that understands how people become recluses is that taken to the extreme, someone could take this idea and say, see, I always knew it. I knew other
Mm,
people would let me down. All I need is God and my dog and my couch and my husband
mhm,
and my house. But we also know, of course, that God designed us to be in community and to
mhm,
be with others, and that, we're called to love God and love other people as we love ourselves. Monica Kirkland in her episode she's talked about something of like there are literally two things that like we're called to do, and one of them is to be in community. And so anyway, like how do we find that tension, especially in a world where empathy is being labeled toxic, and
mhm,
compassion is
mhm,
at an all-time low, and people are letting us down left and right.
mhm.
What do you say to the person who's very tempted to go, I'm just going to go then to the ultimate secure attachment and skip
Yeah.
all the rest of this? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and similar to you, especially when you're a highly sensitive person, it's like, "Okay, great, I'll just go be like a monk," and there was a
Yeah.
category for that back in the olden days, I'll just go live in the caves with God, and maybe a
Yeah.
dog. And,
Yes.
I think 2 things. One, I think, what a secure soul does, what's anchoring in that secure base of love is, number 1, it allows you to right size your expectations of other people. So when you go into your community, when you go into your relationships, you're grateful for the good and you're more easily able to give grace for where there isn't perfect understanding, right? Where it's like, well, that's okay because I don't need, even in marriage, I don't need to be completely 100% understood in everything I'm saying because I know what I'm trying to say and I get the
Yeah.
good intentions there. It allows you to give grace. And then number 2, to your point, also, I think from a secure soul, we can extend more compassion and we want to bring and be as much as possible a loving anchor for others. To be, it's what you're doing for your audience. It's what you're doing for your clients. It's, you're trying to figure out, and even just for a friend, it's like, how can I in this moment be a glimpse of that safe presence for someone else, and we derive meaning out of that. There's purpose in that, and the more secure I am, the more that's not coming from codependency or desire to please or desire to get something. It's genuinely coming from, I'm secure right here. I can be this safe place for someone else, and that feels really good. That feels really
Yeah.
good. We need that. It's good for others and it's good for us. So I think
Mm.
we adjust our expectations for what we're taking in a healthy way. I still need something from this person, but I don't need them to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then also I can show up for people out of a genuine compassion, not I talk a lot about codependency, not a desired, I'm doing this and I hope they'll see that I'm doing it because then they'll like me.
Right.
It's speaking like someone who's never done that before, but it's a genuine, and the more I grow, I'm like, that feels so good. Like I just have this to offer. And I'm so
Right.
grateful because it's evidence of how far I've come.
Yeah, gosh, I love that because when you were describing that, it reminded me of the dedication of underestimated is like a lifetime of being overlooked has turned you into someone who sees. And
It's
so
so
you get to
good.
be the one who walks into those conferences and say, "Oh, you know what? You are VIP in my eyes. Let's go
I
sit
love
together
that.
over here." Okay, so kind of coming back to this idea of in those moments where, oh, we're instantly spiraling, you talked about some really good practical tools, hand on the heart. How old am I in this moment? What is shame
Mhm.
showing up and telling me? Another one that you talk about is this idea of like almost like a breath prayer of recognize and return. And you say those kind of two things, but sort of form like the backbone of the book. So, what are they? And how can we almost kind of like inhale and exhale them in the moment when we're spiraling and I don't belong?
Yeah, I practice this all the time. And it's no matter what I'm feeling, if I feel cranky or I'm frustrated or tense or, comparing myself, it's like recognize this is what's happening. This is what, because
Yeah.
it flips you out of into that observing. This is what's happening. It's true. And then return. I am loved even here.
Yes.
And the
That
point of
one.
that is I don't have to fix myself. Usually it's like recognize I'm comparing myself. Fix that. Don't do that. It's like, no, recognize this is what's happening. I am loved even here. And that
Ooh.
exhale just makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's so good. You say, yeah, we'll go through a few of them you list in the book. Recognize I don't belong. Inhale, recognize I don't belong. Exhale, returned, I am loved even here. Inhale, recognize I'm alone. Exhale, return, God is already here. A few other the returns you mentioned that people can put in their back pocket when they don't have the script themselves. I am held even in this painful moment. I am loved even though I feel alone. I am known in all of what I'm feeling. And you say to cultivate what I call the secure soul is to practice this rhythm over and over, to recognize disconnection and return again and again to capital love itself. From this inner place of safety at the center of God's care, you learn to relate more honestly and wholeheartedly with others in a virtuous cycle of love. That being said, as you've mentioned many times in the episode, sometimes there comes a time to walk away. And you
Mhm.
describe leaving the
Mhm.
auditorium. I just want to briefly read that description because I think it might be for somebody listening. You say, here in this tucked away corner of the room, something sacred is happening. An inner bond is forming. The beginning of secure connection. This is between you and your younger self, not anybody else in the room. And then I sense something else from her, so quiet and yet so clear. I want to leave. I feel the truth of it in my body. My work is done here. I have no reason to continue to pretend. Sometimes the brave thing to do is to stay in the room and do the inner and outer work. Other times, the brave thing to do is to excuse yourself, to give yourself permission to leave a room that will always feel like a misfit.
Mm.
I don't owe this space my presence, and I don't have to prove anything by staying. I rise slowly. I gather my things. The bag I once held like a shield now rests lightly on my shoulder. The heels that feel too tall now feel dignified and poised. As I walk with her out of the hall, out of the auditorium, and out of the conference, I sense God's presence. God is with us. We are a little trio of love, the young teen, the grown woman, and the presence who never left us. That makes me want to burst into tears.
Mm.
Oh, that's so good. So what is it just like a case by case basis? How do you know when to stay and do the work? And how do you know when to set these boundaries of like, oh, this is a table where my worth is not being appreciated and it is
Yeah.
time to leave. That is the brave thing to do.
Yeah. I don't go into boundaries a lot in this book because it's mostly the inner work, but that's probably the
Yeah.
best of you. It's where I
Hmm.
go into some of the, because I love that you highlighted this. This is not a carte blanche for, well, I'm loved, so I can put up
Yeah.
with anything. It's like,
Right.
I am loved and my soul is secure. Therefore, I now have the
Right.
perspective to
Right.
see what is a fit and what isn't. Um, that's that discernment. That's that when all of me is online. And also some of it comes from, that 13-year-old girl that carries that wound. A lot of it was because she didn't know how to leave rooms she didn't fit in. She didn't have the agency. So a lot of it is this work from the secure soul is, what would I do if I could be with her now? I'd be like, oh honey, take my hand,
Yeah.
let's just get out of this party.
That's
Let's
right.
just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
What would I do if this was my daughter? I would be like,
Right.
why are we wasting time with these people? Let's get over here. And so a lot of that kind of inner work helps you see more clearly.
Mm.
um I know we're running short on time, but there's a little moment in the book where I have this kind of high achieving part of me that took control because I didn't understand the social dynamics of middle school. And as I'm trying to help this young kind of algebra loving part of me kind of relax, I'm surprised because she pulls out a chessboard. She wants to play chess with me. And it was just this funny little imaginative, but I thought to myself, I actually love playing like mental games. My husband and I will play games together. And, I didn't have the confidence in
Mm.
middle school to be like, this is what I like to do. I don't like to do this other stuff. But instead, I spent all my time feeling like on the outside of things I thought were what we were supposed to be doing,
That's right.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So
Yeah.
now I have the agency to go, oh, I don't want to do that thing. I want to do this thing. Let's go do this thing that we actually love doing.
That's right. That's right. Okay, last big question for you as we wrap up is this is a what do you say to the person listening? So this is the show up season. It goes back to underestimated. And in that book, in chapter 1, I say, for those of us among the sacred order of the underestimated, we have become experts in our own internal combustion. We found a way to take other people's words and shove them down, bottle them up for future use as an accelerant of explosive proportions, to
Hmm.
show everyone who ever doubted us or left us out on purpose just exactly how far we've come. We figured out somewhere along the way how to harness the decomposing, off gassing, hot piles of rejection rotting in the backyard corners of our minds and turn it into jet fuel. And in slow growth, I
That's so
also talk about
good.
this. Thank you. I also talk about this idea of we're afraid if we do all of this healing, we will lose all of our drive.
Hmm.
So to the person who's been listening all along and they're like, I do often walk into these situations and I feel like I don't belong and I feel like other people are leaving me out and I feel like I'm the underdog people are discounting. And I actually have learned how to use that to
Hmm.
drive me and motivate me and give me the jet fuel to prove them all wrong. And I'm
Hmm.
afraid that if I start healing these ruptures, these soul ruptures and these
Mm.
wounds, I won't be able to show up like I have. So why is the healing worth it? Make the case for that person or just parting words for the person who's feeling that way.
My friend Andy Colbert, who I know you know, has this saying that I
Yeah.
love, and it's the first thing that came to mind when you said that. She always says, work from love, not
Mm,
for
yeah.
love. And
That's
so what
good.
it does is it changes your ability. I'm working from, like, I still love to achieve. It's fun. I like to set a goal.
Yeah.
It's fun. But it's working from love,
Mm,
from that place of inner delight versus for something that I'm never
Ooh,
going to get anyway. Yeah.
that's so good. Okay, well, I could just hang out with you forever and ever and ever. Maybe we'll do that one day. We'll just have a 3-day
I
marathon of
know.
conversations. But thank you so much for being here, first of all, Allison. Let them know where they can find you, the book, any pre-order bonuses. This will come out before launch day. So just let them know all the things.
I love that. I think the best place is thesecuresoulbook.com, thesecuresoulbook.com, or you can go to dralisoncook.com. But we've got a bunch of pre-order bonuses. If this touched you, I'm doing I did a masterclass on healing the wounds within that supplements the book, and a guided audio reflection that you can listen to kind of help center yourself, and a live roundtable I did with a couple of therapist friends on tending these inner wounds. So all of that is available through, I think, August 20th. So
Nice.
when you pre-order, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, friends, the book is The Secure Soul, Finding Inner Strength and Connection When Trust Doesn't Come Easy. It is out August 18th, everywhere books are sold. Get this in your hands. Go grab those pre-order bonuses. Get those in now. And for now, I'm going to leave you with these words from Dr. Alison Cook, who filled an entire hour of an episode just with the first 1 or 2 chapters of this book. So go get this in your hands. She says, each moment of fear, each pang of loneliness, each surge of anxiety isn't failure, nor is it your destiny. Instead, it is an invitation to return to love. I recognize that I'm disconnected. I return to love. Again and again, recognize, return. Again and again, come home to love. And here's the beautiful truth: you can always return to love. Until next time, friends, this is The Mary Moran Show, and welcome to your Show Up season.